Welcome to the Real Estate Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Gary Lipsky of Break of Day Capital. I talk to leading experts to discuss a wide range of subjects to educate investors on best-in-class practices to build legacy wealth and positively impact communities. Let's jump in. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Gary Lipsky with Break of Day Capital. Be sure to join our Facebook group, Asset Management Mastery, where we have a great community of thousands of like-minded individuals sharing resources and best practices. Hey everyone, we have launched the BODC Multifamily Impact Fund. Invest with a trusted operator with a track record of success. Our fund offers diversification, risk mitigation, tax benefits, and stringent acquisition criteria. If you'd like to learn more, head over to our website at breakofdaycapital.com.
Choosing the right insurance coverage for multifamily properties isn't that complicated, if you know who to talk to. At the Garzella Group, we're uniquely qualified to help you navigate the range of policy choices you have, and we're committed to saving you 30% in the process. We do intensive market research and have nationwide relationships, so we can find coverage other insurance brokers simply can't. We should talk. Go to quotenow.biz and we'll start the conversation.
Today on the podcast, we have George McCleary. George is a real estate investor who gained viral fame by exposing how effortlessly a house can be stolen and how squatters and title thieves exploit the system to steal from homeowners with impunity. His viral video, I Stole a House, amassed tens of millions of views across all social platforms. He is based in Portland, Oregon, where he is the CEO of Defender Networks, a company dedicated to protecting their uses from squatters, title fraud, and other real estate scams. Thanks for joining us, George. Can you start by telling the listeners a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure thing, Gary. Thanks so much for having me on the show. So like you said, I'm a real estate investor. I've been doing it about 22 years now, which is crazy to say. It's been a heck of a ride. Had a couple side quests in the marijuana industry and now in the squatter and title fraud industry. So it really just demonstrates my ADHD and the fact that I just can't sit still. I've done a lot of stuff in real estate. I've got a rental portfolio of mainly multifamily assets, a little bit in the industrial space as of lately, but I've done everything from flipping to developing from ground up to buy and hold, really kind of everything across the board. And one day, Super Bowl Sunday to be exact, I'd been making videos for social media for a while, and none of them had really caught fire. But one day it just moved me, and I was moved by basically policy in Portland that had really just been affecting my livelihood personally as a real estate investor. And it was specifically related to squatting and how these people were getting away from it or getting away with it. And a couple of my colleagues had been afflicted. I never personally had, at least not to a great extent. I usually just kick out homeless people out of a new build or something like that, and they, shuffle along. But this was much more egregious. And I thought, okay, this is getting worse and worse. I got to make a video about it. And so I post it and it just absolutely explodes. The whole thing just really changed my life. So fast forward months later, I'm still getting calls from people that have been victims of squatting and of deed fraud. And I get to talking with all of these people and say, hey, I saw you in the YouTube comments. Sounds like you got a story to tell. Let's get on a call. And Gary, I just heard the craziest stories that you can possibly imagine. So I basically compiled all this data of how people have gotten rid of their squatters and how people have done so unconventionally in a lot of cases. And then also I figured out a way to prevent deed fraud from robbing people of their equity, and it formed basically two companies under Defender Networks. One is a squatter education course called Squatter Defender, and the other one is Title Fraud Defender. And I've been on a mission ever since then to protect investors like you and me.
Awesome. I love it. What did you have a plan for it to go viral, or it just magically happened and you were just kind of stunned by it?
I was stunned by it. I knew that it would probably strike a nerve, but the thing is, I had spent so many hours making videos that I thought were really going to hit, and then I post them and it gets 300 views or something like that. So I was used to being disappointed, Gary. That's pretty much it. And so after this one really blew up, it really taught me a whole lot about a lot of things, but in particular, just how virality works with social media and viral videos. And then also how crazy, mean, and judgmental people can be. Because I had people sending me death threats. I had people saying horrible things about me because they thought that I'd actually stolen a house. And I'm like, yo, click on my profile, get a clue. But no, there's a big crowd of people that really thought that, I was a real scumbag, that I really was stealing houses. So yeah, the whole thing was a real shock to the system.
I remember it. I mean, it came across on one of my social media too. Someone was just commenting, "Hey, did you see this post?" And he said he could steal a house and yada yada yada. So like I could see how it really generated a lot of um, people talking about it. So that's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, it sure did. And actually, within our community of GoBundance, I actually got a few people that didn't love the fact that I was wearing a GoBundance hat, which is a club that Gary and I are in. That's exclusive enough to where, people don't want to see you committing crimes with a GoBundance hat on, which makes sense. But that was kind of one of the Easter eggs that I left in there to let people know, like, hey, I'm not actually one of the bad guys here. I'm a real estate investor. This is my vocation right here. This is all very tongue in cheek, but a lot of people didn't get the joke. So, but I smoothed it over.
So you talked about crazy stories. So tell us one of the most craziest story that you heard about squatting.
Boy, I mean, where to even begin? I'd say probably my favorite ones they fall under the unconventional methods of squatter removal. And every single time, invariably, I'd be talking to people and they'd say, well, I can tell you how I got rid of my squatter, but you got to promise me that you're going to keep this to yourself. And I'm like, all right, I want to be able to tell the story, but I won't implicate you. How's that sound? He's like, yeah, that works. And everything from like pouring roaches down the chimney, releasing a bunch of rats, other people removed the doors, kicked in the windows, just basically a whole menagerie of different ways to render the house uninhabitable for the squatter. And so you do have to be a little bit careful with stuff like that, because if the squatter gets injured or killed, which actually has happened, and there are people sitting in jail right now for that exact reason, because they injured or killed their squatter. If you do that, then that's not a good thing. There's a line to walk there. But the stories about people that released snakes, I think, is probably my favorite if I had to pick one. I'm not sure where they got access to a large quantity of snakes, but they released them in the house. The squatters decided they did not want to live among the serpents, and they left. Problem solved.
Nice. And so what do you guys do from a legal standpoint to get squatters out?
So I talk about it in my Squatter Defender course. Basically, we talk about prevention, detection, and ejection. And of course, everybody wants to hear about the ejection portion of it. So there's no one method that I wholeheartedly recommend in every situation, because every situation is completely different. But one thing I tell people, it's very straight up, is that you have choices. You don't have to go the legal route in terms of like hiring a lawyer, going through the court system, and effectively evicting somebody who's never been a tenant at all. But still, nonetheless, you're forced to go through the legal system, or at least that's the conventional way of going through the legal system. And sometimes that actually is probably your best bet, because in some jurisdictions, the eviction of a tenant can take you like a month or something like that. And that's pretty quick and painless. And for that reason, there's a lot of methods that are just, you don't even need to do them because it's so quick. But more often than not, people live in cities where the eviction takes months or years. And so in that case, you got a bunch of different choices. I don't recommend the snakes, but you got options.
And squatting can really cost a tremendous amount of money to someone, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's one thing that I was completely shocked by, is when I'd read about news articles. So people contacted me after I went viral, but I also started contacting other people. I just look them up, because there would be news stories about, hey, this person was victim of a squatter and they're fighting this fight, but then that would be it. There'd never be like an epilogue or a follow-up story. So I'd track them down and I'd say, hey, whatever ended up happening with that? And they'd say, oh man, what a nightmare. But we eventually did get him out. It took a year and a half. And I'm like, so what was the financial damage? Like, what's the bottom line here? Because we're all real estate investors to some extent. If you own your home, you're invested in real estate, right? A lot of times they're taking over investment properties. And so it's dollars and cents. How much did this cost you? And I was utterly shocked, Gary, about how much every single time these people were costing the owners of the property. It was ranging between somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 per incident per squatter. So, and people are like, how on earth does it even add up to that? But court costs, legal fees, and a big one is not being able to rent out your property, but still having principal, interest, taxes, insurance payable month over month over month over month. That loss in rent plus the damage that squatters invariably do to your property, those are two huge components. They're not taking care of the place. They're completely trashing it every single time. It's like 99% of the time. And because of that, it just adds up. And it hits the 50 or 100 or more than $100,000 mark pretty much every single time.
And I would imagine that most of these are more of like the single kind of person that has, like a rental home, not a company or one of these bigger organizations that probably have better systems in place. It's that lone person that has this,
and mom and pop.
Yeah, they're gonna take the biggest hit too.
Yeah, these it's something like over half of the rental stock in America, in single family anyway, is owned by mom and pop people that own less than 4 properties. And so when you think about how much wealth or how much income these people have, it's usually not a lot. You've got a couple people that have just a couple rental properties. It's a part of their nest egg. It's really, a lot of times, it's all they've got. And so taking away from that is really, really a heinous thing.
And that's also why, when I talk to investors, a lot of them want to get, have that single family rental or two, and they think that's their path to financial freedom. And quite often it's just a lot more work, and because they just don't have that scalability, they don't have the time to really manage it correctly. And you can be successful doing that, but often, in best cases, they break even and they've gone through this hassle for 5-10 years and finally start investing more focused on the passive side.
Yeah. And I always tell people, like, hey, if you want to invest in real estate, you want to become a real estate investor, go for it. But if you're like a doctor or a lawyer, you've gone to school for years to get really good at something, and you want to start a brand new vocation in real estate investing, like, dude, get real. You're not going to be anywhere near as the guys who do it every single day. And you're probably better off like giving your money to a professional, investing alongside them in a project that's explainable in plain English, and getting as good or better a return without having to getting blue in the face doing all the work on this property.
Yeah, absolutely. So I read recently, and actually I listened to a podcast, David Green, who used to be one of the hosts of the Bigger Pockets podcast, and a very successful investor. He lost 50 properties of title theft through a website glitch. So let's dive into that and what you do for title.
Yeah. So title fraud is something I had never heard of until I went viral for the squatting video. But along the way, I met a guy and he said, yeah, no, this guy actually changed the deed to his name and then he moved in. I'm like, he can just do that? And he's like, yeah, man, it's just like a notary stamp and like, a deed. You don't really need anything for that. I was like, well, what about like title? And he's like, no, man, you don't even need to go to title. You just submit it to the county and the title don't like talk to each other on every transaction. So I'm like, so I start digging on this, and sure enough, this is a crime that used to be committed like a few dozen times per year, like 10 years ago, but it's just gone up and up and up. And now it's like tens of thousands of cases because criminals have figured out that all it takes to deed a property into somebody's name is just a piece of paper with a rubber stamp on it. And it's very easily forged. And what people are doing is they're either impersonating owners and deeding it into their names, or more often than not, a fake name. And then the people will move in like a squatter. But a lot of times the much more heinous thing is that they'll sell the property or take out loans against it. A lot of times they'll sell it because it'll be like an older person's property who has no loan against the property. So when title gets pulled to the end buyer, The end buyer, of course, is going through title because they just think there's somebody buying a house. Title says, okay, well, got no liens or no mortgages or anything. So yeah, we're good to go. Wow, it looks like this guy bought it for 300 grand 2 weeks ago. He's just trying to sell it for a quick profit for, 310 or something. And yeah, everything looks fine here. So then a lot of times they'll have like a fake ID that they get from the dark net. The house will be titled in that name, and the signature is a perfect match on the back of that ID. And they'll have gotten a bank account because they've stolen the identity of somebody. And just like that, your equity disappears.
Wow. So one, how do you stop that from happening? I mean, I know some people have title insurance, or I mean, most people do, and I assume it could happen to any of us.
Oh, yeah. So I'm glad you brought up title insurance, because if you go to your closing statements on all the properties that you bought, chances are it's going to say something like an Alta owner's policy. So not many people know this, but there's multiple policies that you can get for title insurance. But the main two are an owner's policy or a homeowner's policy, two different policies. Most people go with owners because it's far less expensive. And what it insures against is like liens that the title company misses from the past, from the day you bought the house in the past. Nothing going forward, though. And what title fraud is, it's fraud and impersonation after the policy date. And that's covered by the homeowner's policy. But that's the thing. Most people, almost no people, have the homeowner's policy that actually protects against this. So if you get title frauded and you have the regular owner's policy, which you probably do, then you are completely SOL. The title company is going to say like, ooh, yeah, see, here's the thing. Here's your policy. It's the owner's policy. It protects you in the past. And this happened to you after you bought the property. So because it's after you bought the property, yeah, sorry, our policy isn't going to cover that. So you're not going to get your money back, unfortunately.
And I mean, I'm certainly guilty of it, really not diving into it. I'm sure 99% of the people out there are guilty of doing the same. They're not really diving into what their policy covers. How much more is a homeowner's policy than the other policy, than the owner's policy?
It really varies. And of course, it has a lot to do with how much the property costs and whatnot. But it's generally like, it's like half again more, like, give or take every time. But the thing is, you can't just like, you can add on coverage, or you can go out and buy a new one, but that's like, it can cost you like, $1,000, $2,000, $10,000. But what I did is basically stopping the equity theft from the beginning. And the only way you really know if somebody has stolen your title is if your title changes. And so what Title Fraud Defender does, that's the software that I made. What Title Fraud Defender does is it just monitors your title, that is. And if it ever changes, you get notified. It says, hey, Gary, your title just changed. Did you do that? Did you sell the place? And if you didn't, you know about it quick enough to where they can't steal your equity and you can fix it relatively quickly. Whereas 99% of the time, like, these county offices are not notifying people that their property is sold because they don't have their contact information. They don't have their email or phone number. So there's some of them that have signed up for these exact things, like title alerts through other companies that are like Title Fraud Defender, but the vast majority don't. So what Title Fraud Defender does for just a few bucks a month, it monitors your title. And if it changes over, you get notified right away and you can fix it and you don't lose all your equity.
Sounds like a good deal.
Yeah. No, there's a market leader at Home Title Lock. They charge $20 a month for it. And when I started looking into it, I'm like, boy, I feel like I could do this for a lot less expensive. And turns out that I can. So instead of $20 a month, it's I think it starts at like the highest is like $5 or $6 a month for one property. But if you got a portfolio, it goes down to like $2 a month or something. Really, it's really tiny.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you coming on, George. I got a ton of education on squatting and title defense. Where can listeners find out more about you and the offerings you have?
Totally. So find me on social media. I'm on all the platforms. If you just Google George McCleary, McCleary Realty and Development, and your platform of choice, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, I'm very easily findable, very easily searchable. And I'd love to hear from you, especially if you've got a story about squatting or deed fraud. And if you want to take the Squatter Defender course, it's at squatterdefender.com. It's $199. However, for Gary's listeners today, for the Break of Day Capital crowd, I've got a discount code for 20% off on both Squatter Defender and Title Fraud Defender, and that's BODC for Break of Day Capital. So key that in there and you'll save 20% on the $199 Squatter Defender online course, and then on your Title Fraud Defender subscription as well. And that's at titlefrauddefender.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, George. Really appreciate it. This is Gary Lipsky signing off. I'll be back next week with another informative episode on the Real Estate Investor Podcast. To all of our listeners, thanks for joining us. And if you like this episode, please head over to iTunes or Stitcher and like, subscribe, and leave a review, as it will help us reach more people. And if you'd like to learn more about what we do at Break of Day Capital, head over to our website at breakofdaycapital.com and sign up for our newsletter and fill out our investor application. We'll talk to you next week.